We are so excited to have Jim and Brian with us. We've worked with them for years. They're both good friends, educational powerhouses, and I am not going to spend a lot of time introducing them because they have long, wonderful introductions, but I want to give them all the time to share learning with you this morning. We are so excited that their work is coming together, and I was able to spend a week with them this past, I guess, was it February, Jim and Brian in
Yeah.
Lawrence, Kansas?
Yep.
Wonderful week of learning and wanted to bring all of that back to our network. So, welcome everyone. If you have a question or a tech issue, just put that in the chat box. Dakota and I will try to handle that. I appreciate Dakota and everything he's done getting ready for today. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Jim. We'll come back at the end and wrap up. So stay with us, hang in there, and you will have access to the resources throughout the year in the network. So, Brian, Jim, thank you for being with us today. Good morning and welcome.
Great. It's great to be here. Jim, do you want to start?
Go for it, Brian.
Okay. All right. Well, it's great to be here. I see some familiar faces. Always a pleasure to work with A Plus Alabama and Stoney's team. And we're excited to bring something to you that Jim and I are actually in the process of working on. So it's a work in progress. Please pardon our dust. But you'll have a chance to help us kind of shape where this work goes. We're essentially combining what Jim has been doing for years on instructional coaching, the impact cycle, with the new classroom instruction that works. And so we like to think of it really bringing together the science of learning, the science of teaching, and the emergent science of coaching. And so that's really going to be our focus for the next hour and a half, but also then really the sessions that you all are doing with A Plus Alabama are going to kind of dig deeply into this, maybe this main question here of how can we as instructional leaders, instructional coaches, teachers ourselves, right? How can we apply or help teachers apply the science of learning, the science of teaching? And we're calling it the emerging science of coaching. But actually, there's a lot of research out there on coaching, what works and what does not work. What works would include what Jim does, I would say. But the whole idea is how do we make it more joyful for students, right? And I've always felt that like research, I know sometimes it feels like a bit of a drag or one more thing we're telling teachers you should do. Like kind of like, you should go to spinning class, eat kale salad. But for me, the whole idea of the better, if we're going to make learning experiences better look like how our kids' brains work, the easier it is for them, the more joyful it is for them, and also for us as educators. So that's hopefully the promise of what we're going to do in our time together and what you all will be doing with the A Plus Alabama group as you go deeper into this content. So we were thinking about the session objectives being this, and then Jim, I'll give you a chance to jump in as well and introduce yourself. I kind of just jumped right in.
It's
But
good.
really, here's what we're seeing for the series of what we're going to do is hopefully you'll get some more exposure. You'll explore the science of teaching, coaching, and then the science of learning so that you can, by the end of this time together with the A Plus Alabama group, maybe walk away with a better explanation of the process of learning, have more knowledge of evidence-based practices that reflect the science of teaching for class and classroom, and then be better able to apply the emerging science of coaching. And so put all this together so that your teachers can get a better picture of current reality, set the goals that for themselves, build their knowledge and skills, and you can help them do that. And then hopefully find success in their classroom. So sorry, that was a long, I kind of did my intro and jumped in talking about stuff. Jim, I'll give you a moment to share, or how much ever time you need to share. So,
Well, I'm honored to have this chance to share these ideas, and it's been a privilege to be working with Brian. We'd have the book out, except one of us is really slowing up the process, but I promise to try to do better and get it out eventually. But it's been so much fun, and I would say maybe a big idea that I would want to share today is that I think people misunderstand coaching, and sometimes they think coaching is telling people what to do. And sometimes they think it's just choose your own adventure, just letting teachers do what they want to do without any kind of reference to like picking TikTok as your way to figure out what's a teaching practice. And what I would say is you need to recognize the professionalism of teachers, and teachers need a lot of autonomy, and you need to work from evidence-based practices. One without the other doesn't get the job done. There's a whole history of reading programs that literally billions of dollars were spent on that failed because teachers didn't have autonomy. And there's an equal number of coaching programs that have failed because it's kind of just, well, whatever you feel like doing, let's do that. What you need is both. And the reason we're working together is to talk about how do you bring together what evidence says about learning, about teaching, and put it together with what we're learning about effective coaching. That's the idea. Recognizing the professionalism of teachers, and one without the other doesn't get it done. I think if you don't have a evidence-based set of proven practices and an understanding of learning, it's going to be difficult to succeed. And if you just try to force people to do it exactly the way, give them scripts and follow up, and you're probably going to encounter a lot of resistance. It's probably not going to be effective. There's a lot of programs where that's been the issue. So that's my thing. I think we're here to talk about how do you put these two things together. Brian's going to talk about science of learning, science of teaching, and then I'll say, well, how do we take what Brian says and put it into coaching? That's kind of our plan for today.
Yeah. And it's been an honor for me to work with Jim. And in fact, as Jim and I first started working on this book together, the more I learned what Jim was doing, I kept realizing his approach to coaching is our six-phase model of learning. It totally reflects how adults learn as well. And so we had a lot of those, almost like, the 1, 2, 3 jinx, moment. But also Jim has expanded my thinking a lot too. He's kind of a mind expanding person, safer than LSD, right? So, I think you'll see that these two things overlap. How we think about the process of learning for students is going to reflect what you all can do as instructional leaders, as instructional coaches. And even if you're in this session as a teacher, hopefully you'll also see, oh, this is how I want to learn, how I want to grow as a professional. And to Jim's point, everything we're doing is about dignifying the profession of education. This is a complex profession that we're in. It's based on a science. There's a knowledge base here, a very deep and rich knowledge base, just like any other profession, whether it's engineering or medicine or law. We are in a profession. So we want to always lift that up too. So as you think about these goals, we always like people to set their own goals. So this is kind of reflective of our own approach to learning. So I just invite you to think, you don't have to put anything in the chat yet, but just in your own mind, set your intentions about how do you want to spend this time with us, or Jim and I this morning, but also just over the course of time as you're working with the A Plus Alabama folks, like what would your goal be if these are our objectives? So just give yourself a moment to think about that. And then we'll get started talking about the science of learning, what we know about it. And we've got kind of an intention in mind, what you would hope to extract from our time together. Okay, great. So let's talk about the process of learning. I know that a lot of you last year, you did a book study on the new classroom instruction that works. And you know that we have described the learning journey as being kind of a long and perilous journey. There are a lot of hairpin curves in that journey where basically at any point in the process, anything that we're learning, we can do one of two things. It can either go deeper into memory or we can forget it or ignore it, as the case often is. So most of the things that we encounter, we do not retain. And the same thing is true as Jim just described about teacher learning. Most of the things that teachers learn in a workshop, they're not going to retain. And it's because we don't empower them. We don't give them autonomy. We don't let teachers learn in the same ways we want kids to learn. So I'll start with this idea though. What we're describing here, while it's based on cognitive science over the last few decades has been developed, it's based on a more modern research base of classroom practices, the science of teaching. What you're going to see is this is like timeless kind of stuff. So it's not ivory tower. You're going to be like, oh, this is actually how human beings have learned for millennia, likely. So I invite you to think about this. And you can put this in the chat if you want. Something that you've learned over the last maybe year or so that you did just on your own. No one forced you to learn this. It wasn't you weren't doing this for your job or for extra pay. It was just something you did on your own for fun. And I'll describe mine. But Jim, I'd love to hear something that you've learned too. But mine was just like this. I played the guitar poorly. But there was a song that I was sharing with my daughter. I'm into blues music, and we're in the car together. She's now a freshman in college, but she was a senior in high school. And it's a song by Taj Mahal called "Leavin' Trunk." And I gotta say, it's probably one of the best blues songs of all time. Martin Scorsese has it in his list of the best blues songs of the 20th century. Anyway, we're listening to it, and she's like, "This is a cool song." I'm like, "I know, right? I've known this song since I was in high school." But the thought got in my head like, I would like to learn how to play this song on the guitar. So that was my impulse. Like, I'm going to try to play this well enough that maybe I can actually get through the song. So that was one thing I tried to learn recently, and I'll describe as the process goes on how each of those six phases applied. But Jim, what's something that you've maybe tackled in the last year or so?
Our conference, the Teaching Leading Coaching Conference, is next week, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And my keynote kicks it off. The theme of the conference is learning from experience. And so my keynote is focused on um, life lessons. And it's something like 12 questions for a better life. I say something like because it's still being evolving. But I've been interviewing all these people about different aspects of life. And, some key things have come up, like that resentment interferes with love. And
Mm.
resentment is like someone said, drinking poison to kill somebody else. And just the power of love in life and being a learner, how we use our time. Nothing where you would say, oh, I never really thought about that. But as I've done these interviews, my conviction to be more principled in how I use my time, to be more forgiving in the way I interact with other people. I've been learning so much about life, and it's been such a gift to do it. So just to give you one example, I talked to Art Costa, the founder of cognitive coaching,
Yeah.
and he said, well, he's 91 years old. And he gave me this long little talk about the importance of love. And he says, well, I've been married 77 years and it keeps getting better. It's
Wow.
just been a
Yeah.
gift to have all these stories from people about how they live their lives. It's been wonderful.
That's great. I mean, it's probably one of those things it's super simple, right? It's the golden rule kind of stuff, but then
Right,
applying is what's hard. So simple things aren't always easy, as we know. So that's and
right.
if yeah, right. If you want to throw in the chat what things you've been working on, what you're going to find is really what you probably all learning something and mastering something usually requires, I think what always requires all six phases of learning. So, okay, so hold that thought in mind
There's quite
as
a few
we,
here. Can you see the chat, Brian?
I'm not sure if I can see it. Let me
There
hit
are a
the
lot of
button.
baking related ones,
Oh,
meditation, how
geology,
the
cool.
timer for my sprinkler system works for my yard. Lots of funny things.
Great. Yeah.
Lots of
How to
cool
sing
things.
tenor. I like that. Like golf. That's what I'm. Spanish. I love a couple of folks are saying Spanish. I have Duolingo. I'm still after all this college and high school Spanish. I really am still not fluent. So
Angie Pelton says teenager vocabulary. Good luck with that.
yeah,
Pickleball, I would imagine that's a big winner. Yeah.
German technology. A lot of baking things.
Yeah.
Sourdough. That's cool. Salsa dancing. Awesome. I mean, and what's fun about this, these are all joyful things, right? These are things that you're looking for, that you get excited about, that give your life meaning too. So this is awesome. Scrapbooking, pickleball, I love that. Teenage vocabulary. Unclogging pipes. Tell me how to do that too. I'd appreciate that. Not just using the whatever, Drano. Yeah. How to swim. I love it. Oh, parenting adult children. That actually I could put on my list as well. My wife and I, now that we're empty nesters, it's like it starts all over again, doesn't it? So, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you. So hold those thoughts, right? Because as you're going to see, when we go through this process, miter saw, they just keep coming in. That's cool. And all of these things, nobody forced you to do this, right? This is something oh wow, an adult and a 5-year-old. Bless you. That's great. Okay, so here we'll talk about the learning journey, and it really begins here with our immediate memory. It's what's happening right now for all of you. Our five senses take in, that actually should say 11 million bits of information per second. I keep trying to change that slide. It keeps going back to 1 million. It's 11 million bits of information per second that our five senses take in, which is way more than our brains can process because, as it turns out, our brains can really only process or absorb about 120 bits of information per second. So that means we have to filter out, there's like picture like just a whole field of static, and our brains have to find noise and or signal in all of that noise, right? So how do we do that? Well, our brains have something of a pecking order. And the first thing we're going to pay attention to with all that stimuli is anything that has emotional valence, right? Anything that makes us happy, or feelings of love or joy or sadness or anger, right? That's what we pay attention to first, or we're designed to do that. That helped us survive, obviously, as a species. The first thing we pay attention to are things that are either good or bad, right? Threat or reward. So that kind of makes sense. And as you all can remember, as teachers, this is very true, right? If something just happened on the playground, and they come into your classroom, that is what they're thinking about. If it's something disturbed them or made them angry, or something on social media, or something happened the night before, we're all emotional creatures, right? So that's the first thing. Now, what that means is we need to make sure that our classrooms are safe and positive places where kids feel positive emotion, because then we're ready to, that's the first filter. And the second filter really is this. If the next thing our brains are going to pay attention to are any stimuli that are novel or interesting. So, anything that's out of the ordinary, anything that surprises us. And then again, you think about our survival as a species, it kind of depended on that. It wasn't that there was a tree on the savannah because that tree was there every day. It was that today there's a lion under the tree, right? That's novel, and it also triggers emotional response too. So I'll illustrate here a little bit. So take a look at these images and just see what your eye is drawn toward. In every case, it's what's out of the ordinary, right? You're not paying attention to the full field of grass unless you're that person trying to figure out your sprinkler system, right? You're paying attention to the red flower, right? And you're not counting all the black umbrellas. It's the rainbow umbrella that stands out, and it's you're not paying attention probably to the ocean or the crashing surf. Those are sunglasses. Sometimes people think they're turtles, but they're sunglasses on the beach. And you're probably noticing something unusual about that flower, right? That's called a monkey face flower, right? So that's what our eyes are always drawn toward. It gives you a sense of like how we operate as human beings, how our brains operate. So here is the bad news and the good news about learning. And it's true for kids, it's true for adults. Our brains are hardwired to ignore anything that's boring. That's simple, right? News flash there. I don't know that we needed cognitive scientists to tell us that. But here's the good news, though. And you'll see this in the new classroom instruction that works. Our brains are also hardwired for curiosity, right? We are hardwired to explore, to ask questions, and discover new things. So this is also true in our classrooms. And this is why, as we think about our 6 phase model of learning, we begin right here. We say the first thing that has to happen is kids have to become interested. That's probably, again, pretty axiomatic. You probably didn't need a researcher to tell you that, right? But we learn things more easily if we're interested in it. But you think, and yet though, sometimes I think as teachers, we always felt the pressure of like, we've got so much curriculum to cover, and we find ourselves falling into the pattern of like, open your books to page 47, let's go, right? Instead of thinking about how do we hook interest. And so there's a lot of research that also shows just the power of kids becoming curious about their learning. So when we talk about then helping kids become interested, one of our big teaching strategies in the book is cognitive interest cues. And that's how we help kids become interested. So Jim is going to talk more about how you help teachers set goals, but it might be that you've got teachers saying, you know what, I don't think I get my kids' attention well, or my kids are bored, they're disengaged. Maybe it's like, this is where we want to focus together, is how do we help the kids become more interested in their learning? So let's imagine that's happened though. We've got their interest, but then we see that curiosity fades kind of quickly over time. So here's the second inescapable truth about our brains is that all of our brains are inherently lazy. Daniel Kahneman makes this point that in fact, I'll go to Dan Kahneman right next here. But all learning requires a lot of mental effort, which our brains would prefer not to do. Your own brains right now are like, you're always like, do I have to keep paying attention, or can I power down? Can I do something else that's maybe easier and more joyful? Or like maybe not more joyful, but just easier, right? So Daniel Kahneman makes this point. He's got a book actually called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he says our brains really have 2 operating systems. And there's a fast thinking brain and there's a slow thinking brain. So the slow thinking brain is required to do things like this. It's required to learn how to ride a bike. If you've ever taught a kid to ride a bike, you know it takes a lot of effort, energy, figure out how to balance, how to pedal, all of those things. But then once we've learned how to ride a bike, that's the old adage, right? It's like riding a bike. It's easy. We can think about other things and ride our bike. So once we've automated that process, or it's the difference, like the slow thinking brain is what's required to read nonfiction, to read, an article in Ed Week or whatever something might be, right? Versus like reading a comic strip where we can be only half paying attention probably. Or it's the difference between right now listening closely to a webinar like you all are doing, right? Or watching an action movie, right? We might think of this also a slow thing. We need our slow thinking system to navigate to an unfamiliar place. Even if we have like Google Maps, so often it's wrong, right? We have to pay attention versus like driving home from work. I'm sure a lot of you have the same experience I do. I can get home and like I don't remember most of the drive, right? It's like what happened there? My brain was somewhere else, right? Um, or the difference, as my wife reminds me, between active listening and then just pretending to listen too. So that's the slow thinking brain versus fast thinking brain. Well, now consider for a moment, which kind of thinking does learning require? We agree it's always the slow thinking brain, right? It's effortful, it takes time, it takes energy. But what kind of thinking do our brains prefer? Well, our brains always want to revert back to fast thinking mode, easy mode. You all are the same way, right? I tell groups oftentimes, like, just imagine it's a Friday night. You spent a whole day a whole week at school, long week at work. How many of you are like, I'm just gonna go home. I just want to pour myself a glass of wine, sit on the couch, and read Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time? Right? Nobody, right? Because we want to power down. So like it's the same situation for our kids. And what it means then is if we to keep our attention, we have to commit to learning. We something has to tell our brains, hey, you got to stay in high effort mode, high thinking mode, right? High energy. And so that means we need our kids to commit to learning. One of the things that we know makes our brain stay switched on is dopamine rewards. This is how, all of these apps that are so addictive are designed to do that. Candy Crush, whatever else. You solve the puzzle, you get a little dopamine reward. The same thing is true, though, when we set goals and we achieve our goals. How many of you are like list makers? Like on Saturday, do you have like a to-do list, right? How many of you put something on the list you've already done just to feel good about yourself, right? Um, and that show like every time you check that box, that's a little dopamine reward. So, and the bigger the goal, the more challenging the goal, the bigger the reward. So that's good news, right? That means we can help our students find ways to make learning pleasurable and even addictive, like in the right ways, right? We want to keep setting goals and achieving them. But the question is, what do we have to do to trigger our brains to set a goal and say, this is a meaningful goal? Well, we can boil decades of research in behavioral science, motivational research down to this. There's two questions our brains are always asking. And the first is, can I learn this? Will there be a dopamine reward? Or is it so difficult I'll never get there? Like if I decided I'm going to play Jimi Hendrix on the guitar, that would never happen, right? So that was beyond my reach. But if I can find a song I think I can probably play, I'm more motivated by that. And then the second thing our brains are always asking is, what's in it for me if I do? Is there something valuable about this, personally rewarding? And the two things have to be present, right? I might think I can learn something, but I don't really care to learn it. Or I'm really motivated. There's something in it for me, but it's so far beyond me. I'm not going to be motivated by that. So that brings us to the second strategy, the second that aligns with the second phase of learning, which is really student goal setting and monitoring. And I'm going to share something with you that might be shocking. But we looked at all of these research studies, 105 classroom studies. We did not find this single study that said student objectives are important, learning objectives are important. Does that surprise anybody? We found a ton of studies, though, that said student goals are important. In other words, just simply having a learning objective on the board doesn't do anything if students don't internalize that as their own goal for all the reasons we just described, right? That we have to have that kind of dopamine reward. So think about this for a moment. I'll ask you to reflect back on your own learning journey. What got you interested? What piqued your curiosity? Because somehow you became interested in whether it was sourdough or your sprinkler system. Pickleball, something got you interested. And then was there a goal that you set for yourself? What did that goal look like? For me, it was like what got me interested wasn't just that it was a good song, but there's something really unusual. You should all listen to Live in Trunk if you have time. It's not your ordinary blues song. It's a very different kind of riff. And I just got curious, like, what is he actually doing in that song? That was my curiosity. My goal, I think, was I had this image of like, I'm going to learn this song. My daughter's going to come down to the basement and hear me playing it and go like, Dad, you're cool. That was my goal, right? So I wanted to master the song because I had some intrinsic motivation. Jim, so you were sharing this idea of really becoming, I think, more mindful. What got you interested? Did you have is there a goal that you set for yourself?
Well, I have the keynote, so I have a sort of practical
Okay.
goal. I have to give a
Yeah.
presentation on Monday, so
Yeah.
everything's focused around that goal. But I think it's the bigger thing of, I'm not a youngster like you, but I will tell you though, I saw Taj Mahal in concert a long time ago. Billy Preston was the
Oh,
other
yeah.
person playing. But at any rate, uh, I think we all are reflecting on, what's it mean to live a meaningful life? How can I live a better life? What's working? What's not working? So I think the more fundamentally intrinsic goal was just to learn from these people. I talked to many people over 80 and had people from surveys around the world. And so to me, it's that. It's about an intrinsic goal, but also there's that idea of like I got to give the presentation on Monday. So I would say the learning is accelerating right now because of the keynote.
And that's sometimes true for everything, right? That we have both an
Right.
extrinsic reward, but also something that becomes more intrinsic, or something starts extrinsic, and then we realize there's something deeper. We actually really enjoy this, or it's joy, right? We're seeking fulfillment too. If you all want to
Right.
put in the chat, what sparked your interest, curiosity, what kind of goal did you set for yourself? We'll take a look at those too. And as you'll see, this is going to actually really align with what Jim's approach to coaching talks about here. So I'm
Yeah, when
not
it
sure.
comes to coaching, my friend John Campbell says if there's no goal, it's just a nice conversation. So
Yeah.
goals are critical for coaching.
Yeah.
Lots
I
of
like
things
that.
popping
Yeah.
up.
Yep. I need some non-screen hobbies. My daughter is pregnant. She's expecting, and she was told, find some non-screen hobbies because otherwise you're going to spend all that time when the baby's sleeping on your phone. You want something else to do. I love that. Chinese food. I wanted to make Chinese food. That's great. Yeah. Oh, I see. You started with gut health and then that sparked your curiosity in sourdough bread. That kind of makes sense. I've been in so many groups lately where I ask the same question and sourdough bread keeps popping up. So now
Gut health is big in our house. That's
yeah,
happening here. I'm not the
yeah.
one, but it's a major theme in our house.
Thank you. I'll tell my daughter Jessica, by the way, crochet is something that she might want. I think that was actually something that came up, either that or needlepoint or something like that. Something quiet that doesn't wake the baby, right? So yeah. Oh, just Cracker Barrel got too expensive. So that is a motivation a lot of times. Like I want to cook this thing that's really great. And then you find joy in the whole process. I'll put on some music, and I'll cook and all of that. Yeah. Turn your school brain off. That's great, like a distraction, something different, right? Oh yeah. Oh, you watched the show with subtitles, yeah. A couple years ago, we were going to Portugal, so I had this motivation to learn at least enough Portuguese that I could say, hello, bom dia. So yeah, health, that's great. So what you are all saying is that this thing that you learned, there was some kind of goal. Maybe you didn't realize at the time you had a goal, but maybe kind of in the background, implicitly, you had some kind of goal that you set for yourself. Um, keep your examples coming in. I'm going to keep us rolling here, so I give plenty of time. You want to hear from Jim too. So, um, all right, so let's move on. At this point now, we've become interested. We got kids committed to learning. Maybe same thing as applying for teachers. But now the learning moves into a different phase of memory called short-term working memory, which is really, if you will, the workhorse of the whole process. It's where we take bits of information, sensory stimuli, and begin to turn them into what are called memory traces, right? It's very fragile, but it's that first step of the learning process. So let's talk a bit about what happens in short-term working memory. One of the big things we know actually is our short-term working memory can only focus on one thing at a time. You probably have all heard this, that multitasking is a myth. We're not actually multitasking, we're doing two things poorly when we think we're multitasking. So I mentioned before that our brains can absorb, they take in 11 million bits of information per second, but can only really absorb 120. Well, we can only absorb about 60 bits of information at a time, 60 bits of verbal information or auditory information, which is really of one person talking to us. You probably have all had the experience. You're like at Starbucks and you're trying to read something, and the person next to you is on a phone, right? It's the most distracting thing. It's too much verbal information. You can't take it all in. Um, that's also why we can't do this. We can't really listen to the conversation at our table and eavesdrop on the one behind us, right? I catch my wife doing that sometimes. Sometimes she catches me um, doing that. So that's the first thing. Also, our brains can really only focus on 60 bits of visual information at a time, which is really why we can only look at one thing at a time, why we're not supposed to do this. We're not supposed to be looking at our phones and driving down the road because we're not looking at both things. We don't have like chameleon eyeballs, right? We can only look at one thing at a time. So you might have noticed, though, that I put an asterisk on this, that our brains can only focus on one thing at a time. Here's our brain's superpower. We can actually focus on visual and verbal information simultaneously. It's something called dual coding. And in fact, it's a better way to learn. When you think about it, we've doubled our bandwidth. If we can take in information visually and verbally at the same time, we just simply learn better. That's why we can do this. We can drive down the road, have a conversation, or listen to a podcast, or Audible, or whatever it might be. We can do visual and verbal at the same time, and learning is better when it's visual and verbal. So if somebody tells you, hey, I'm a visual learner, go, that's great. You know who else is? Like 8 billion other people on the planet, because we are all visual learners. So that suggests we want to make learning visual where possible. And you're going to see a couple of the teaching strategies that we identified are connected with that. One other thing to think about, though, sometimes it goes the other way around. Sometimes visual information becomes verbal information. It becomes a packet of information called a word. So think about for a second the vocabulary term photosynthesis. Well, that's capturing a whole bunch of different ideas. When botanists talk about photosynthesis, or when we learn the idea of photosynthesis, we're actually there. It can create a visual image for us, right? It's also why if I say don't picture a pink elephant, you've all just pictured a pink elephant, right? So words have power too. Words can be very visual, so it cuts both ways. So it's not learning should be both visual and verbal, right? All right. So this brings us then to the third phase of learning, which is focused on new learning. And you'll see then that the strategies that are connected with it all have something to do with visual and verbal learning, right? Strategy, instruction, modeling, that's the strategy 4. It's like basically if I'm going to teach a process, I need to show students how to do it. That can be even mental processes, right? The more we can use visuals and concrete examples, the better our students are going to comprehend complex ideas. And also then vocabulary instruction is not about memorizing word lists, right? It's about first front loading our understanding with comprehension, the visuals, and then here's the word that will describe all of that, right? So if I say oligarchy, now I have this maybe image of a handful of people controlling a country, right? Or whatever the term might be. So that's the third phase of learning. I'm going to then from here, so I talked about this is really encoding. It's those initial memory traces. But to go the next step, though, we had to begin processing that information because initially those memory traces are scattered all throughout our brain. They don't make a lot of sense to us. We have to start to pull them together to make sense of learning. The cognitive process is called consolidation. So let's talk a bit about the process of consolidation. One of the big things we know from cognitive science is that what we think about while we're encoding information has a lot to do about our ability to consolidate it, right? The more we think about information while encoding, the better able we are to consolidate the information. So we're going to do a little science experiment here. This is actually a cognitive science experiment. I'm going to let you all be guinea pigs here for a moment in this experiment. So I'm going to ask you to do two things. The first thing is to look at this list of words here and just in your own mind, rate them. Don't put them in the chat. Just in your own mind, rate each of these words on their connotations for you. 1 being unpleasant, 10 being pleasant. Just give yourself a moment to read through each word. Mentally rate them. Okay, have you all had a chance to do that? Kind of a quick little mental exercise. Some words may be triggering for you. Okay, I should have done a trigger warning for some folks. Okay, all right. Now just look at this list of words and do something different. And this time, just look at I want you to identify the words mentally that have the letter E in them. Okay, that's pretty quick. Y'all had a chance to do that? Okay. Now, how many words from that first list can you remember? Don't put them in the chat because that's cheating. But just mentally think about that list of words. And then in the chat, what you can say is how many words can you remember from that? There were 7 words on that list. if you think you recall all seven, put seven. If it's six, just put that in the chat, how many words you can remember from that first list. Seeing mostly in that kind of five and up territory. Yeah. A couple are a little bit lower, twos and threes, but mostly, I think it looks, if I were just to do a quick average, I think we're like at 5.5, just about, something like that. Five, maybe. Okay. Now, oh, here they were, by the way, because you're wondering what they were. Right. Okay. That was the first list of words. Now, how about that second list of words? We looked at just a minute ago. How many words can you remember from that second list? Do the same thing. Don't put them in the chat, but say how many you remember from that second list of words where you were asked to look for the letter E. What's the tally there? I can't tell where one tally ended and the other began. I think I'm seeing lower numbers now. Now I'm looking at twos and threes and so forth, right? So yeah, I think almost all of you would say you remembered more from the first list of words than the second list of words, right? Maybe especially like Roll Tide if that was your school, or War Eagle if you're Auburn. Or maybe you're like, I'm Sanford, I don't care about either. Anyway, so here's that list of words. So the point is this: why did you remember more from the first list than the second list? It's likely because you thought about it more, right? You had a personal connection to it. You thought about, do I like rainfall? Sometimes I do, like Eddie Rabbit, love a rainy night. Other times I don't, right? All of that. Or, depending on your football preferences, right? You thought about each of those words. Or recycling, like, do I like recycling? It's kind of a pain, but I sort of feel good about myself, whatever, right? So the point is this: students only learn what they think about, and people only learn what they think about. That also applies when it comes to adult learning too. So that means we need to ask questions that prompt students to think about their learning, and you'll see there's a couple strategies that are related to that. Here's the other big idea that comes out of cognitive science about our short-term working memory. Well, it's actually right there in the title. It's short-term. So our brains tend to time out after about 5 to 10 minutes. So that means we need brief episodes of minds on learning because it's effortful. And then we need opportunities to kind of like pause a moment and do something different with that learning, apply the learning, think about it differently. We can't always stay revved up. We can't always have our brains going to 11. At times we have to kind of back down and apply something or reflect on the new learning, have a dialogue, have a discussion with somebody. So that brings us then to our fourth phase of learning, which is make sense of learning, where we begin to consolidate what we've learned. And here are some of the strategies that connect with that. And now they'll make sense to you, right? Like high level questions, student explanations, basically making sure we're asking questions that are prompting students to think about their learning. We also have this idea of, we saw this in several studies, guided initial application. So we've taught something, a skill usually, and students are going to apply it, but we're going to watch them as they observe them as they apply that skill, give them feedback, help them improve. But they're beginning to consolidate what may be procedural knowledge into like more of a script, beginning to automate that. But we want to watch them as they do it, make sure that they're not having misconceptions or building bad habits. And then finally, one of the big strategies we saw is peer-assisted consolidation of learning. We used to call this one cooperative learning, but here's what we saw in the studies. It was always in a sequence where there had been some direct instruction first, and then it was time for group learning, group processing. It's hard to process like first round information, focusing on new knowledge in a group, because usually we just need to focus on something and the group distracts us. So we saw lots of examples of peer-assisted consolidation of learning to the point that we've called it out as a really powerful strategy. So now do this. Think again about your own learning journey. And what did it look like for you to focus on your new learning? What did you have to do to focus effectively on your learning? And then how did you begin to make sense of it? So if I use my example of trying to figure out this song, I started with like guitar tabs, which is like just a nomenclature where you see like the notes on what it looks like on a fretboard. And it kind of gives you a sense of like, it doesn't give you the rhythm. You just have to sort of figure it out. And I still struggled. And then I discovered there's a whole treasure trove of YouTube videos of people playing Leave in Trunk on the guitar. I'm like, okay, now that makes sense to me. I could see it and I began to process it. I think as I thought about making sense of my learning, one of the things I do know is music theory. So it helped me to know, okay, this first riff, that's in B flat. And now the next riff is an E flat, so I'm going to change my hand position, but knowing I'm in a different key helped a heck of a lot to begin processing the music. And it's blues, so eventually I'm 12 bar blues. I know how the chords are going to change, how the riff is going to change based upon 12 bar blues, but that helped me basically. I had to take some prior knowledge and make connections. So Jim, if you think about this process of what you're learning right now, how did you focus on it? How did you begin to make sense of it? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I've never seen that happen before. Anyway, sorry about that. Um, First off, I had a series of questions. So I was interviewing people. I was really curious to hear what they had to say, and I was taking notes as they were listening. But then, as I was listening, I was trying to sort through their ideas. So I use a lot of maps. So if you were to look at this whiteboard right here, it's a big map of the six themes and then ideas extending out from the maps, what Gabriel Rico would call a cluster map.
Yeah,
And and then I had to look at vocabulary. I had to say, okay, forgiveness is one of the themes that kept coming up over and over again. Well, what does forgiveness really mean? Does that mean we forget about what the wrong that's been done to us, or how do we process it? So there was this idea of clarifying vocabulary, and then there was sort of a continuous sorting. So I would read things, and how does that fit into what I already know? And I had people complete surveys all over the world. And so I'd go through the surveys, and how does that make me rethink things? So there's kind of a shuffling of ideas as I went through it. But it's definitely, I was keen to learn because it's fascinating and interesting and has
yeah,
personal application. And
yeah,
then it was defining terms, sorting things out, and then continuously sort of improving it. I don't know if improving is the right word, but rethinking,
yeah,
expanding my thinking, deepening my, and also simplifying to some extent, because it's not going to do me much good to try to communicate something that only I can understand. I have to find language that's accessible. So that's
yeah.
kind of how I did it. I did too. I did watch models of other people presenting these kind of things, telling stories.
Nice.
And then I got feedback from ChatGPT where I would load my story in and it would say, you could make this better if you did these things.
Nice.
So I was getting feedback on some of the things and I haven't done it yet, but I usually will do a beta version of the presentation with a few people and they give me feedback on Zoom before I give a live presentation. So
Mhm.
a lot of the
Yeah.
things you mentioned are exactly what I do.
Yeah. Like the concept mapping, that's visual, right? But then the vocabulary and then, but it also helped you kind of make sense of your learning, putting it all together. And then, yeah, that's, see, so, and you made a point too that I want to highlight that I'm describing this as like a linear process. We know it's not. It's iterative a lot of times. You might learn something, make sense
Hmm.
of it, then have to go back and learn. So like, I don't want to make anyone think that we're saying you march right through this process. Oftentimes it's very iterative. You get curious about something else again, and you kind of, circle back. So um, I use the adage a lot that all models are imperfect, some are useful. So hopefully this is an imperfect but useful model because probably a real cognitive scientist would say, no, it's like 17 steps. To your other point, too, like if it's so complicated, people can't really do something with it either. So let's talk then about where the learning ends up, right? This is kind of the most important thing, which is eventually we want our learning to go to long-term memory. Because if we don't retain something, then what's the purpose of any of it? So here's a disappointing, depressing factoid, which is that really students forget about 90% of what they learn within 30 days in the classroom. And if that seems shocking, or maybe you don't think that's quite right, but think about your own experience as a learner. Go back to your college days. It's December and you're studying for finals and you're basically reviewing stuff that you learned like in November, right? And if it was September, forget about it. It's long gone. And so our students have the same struggle, right? That what we do typically in a classroom doesn't really support their long-term memory. And part of that is by design that our brains are actually designed to help us forget things. Like, would you really want to remember everything that ever happened to you? Every conversation you ever had, every meal you ever ate, right? Every dull conversation, every hurtful word that somebody said to you or that you said to somebody else. So our brains are actually designed to help us forget. There are actually people in this world who say they basically they can do this. They can remember almost everything, any kind of minuscule thing, they can tell you what they had for dinner on, February 7th of 2024. Um, but then they'll tell you they can hardly operate in the here and now because their brains are so chock full of information. So our brains are designed to help us forget, which is good. Helps, keeps us sane, I guess, helps us navigate the world, but it's not so great for learning. So how do we then tell our brains that we need to retain this information, that this is important? Well, as it turns out, there's really only one way to do it. It's just repetition. Because what repetition does is it signals our brains to wrap those neurons that store that memory in a substance called myelin, which operates almost like insulation. It makes that neuron fire together. There's an old adage in cognitive science, neurons that fire together wire together. And so there's no getting around this idea of repetition. And what we really want to do is space that repetition out over time because it disrupts that forgetting curve. So if we naturally forget 90% of what we learned the first time we've learned it, if we come back though, after a few days and relearn it, repractice it, well, we've cut the forgetting curve in half already. We've reset a higher forgetting curve, right? And then if we come back again a few days after that, once again, now our forgetting curve is higher. We cut the forgetting curve, we reset the forgetting curve, and so on and so forth. And so really, the more repetitions we get with something, the more automated it gets. And we end up with greater retention and learning. I think the key takeaway here that may be different than what we do in a lot of classrooms is this idea of spaced practice over time, as opposed to like work the problems in the book, work problems 17 through 40 tonight. And you're never going to see them again until the final test, right? So I think we can spend more time here helping students actually recall their memory, recall their new learning better. All that brings us to our fifth phase of learning, which is practice and reflect. And you'll see that we have strategies there that align with this. Retrieval practice, which is basically just quizzing without grading, just a lot of quizzes that actually help us retain information. The more we rack our brains to recall something, the more we signal them to wrap that neuron with myelin. And then spaced mixed practice, like I just explained, is spacing that practice out over time. And then finally, we saw a lot of examples, a lot of studies that point to during that practice time, there may be kids that are struggling to grasp something or master something. It's really, we want to provide almost a new practice cycle, reteaching, relearning, repracticing. You might think of it as tier 2 instruction. This is where that seems to work the best. We've taught something, maybe they didn't get it. We're going to reteach it, but in a different way usually. Don't just talk slower and louder, of course. So those are the three practices connected with that. Now I'm going to share one other big insight from cognitive science. How often does this happen to you? You have information in your brain, but you can't retrieve it. For me, this is like the awkward dinner party thing where I know I've met this person like 14 times and I can't remember their name, right? You all have that experience. And I do the thing where I have my wife come over, introduce herself, and they'll say their name like Dave. And then when I hear the name, I'm like, I knew it was Dave, but why couldn't I remember that? So the memory was there, I just couldn't retrieve it. Well, so this gets at another big principle from cognitive science, which is that memory storage is not the same thing as memory retrieval. We can store memory, but not retrieve it. And usually it's because we don't have enough hooks to that memory. We've only learned it like one time, one place, one setting. So like if I don't see Dave in the same place I saw him the time before, I can't really recall that name. I'll illustrate a little bit. So for an example, something that would be low storage and low retrieval might be the very last thing you Googled, some bit of information, but you're probably not going to remember that. You sometimes are you surprised you look at your own browser history, like, why was I Googling that? Unless it's like a pair of shoes, then it shows up all the time, right? And the next thing you're looking at. Or this thing, like you have low storage, but high retrieval, probably what you ate for breakfast. So you remember that right now. You probably recall what you ate for breakfast, but you probably wouldn't recall what you ate for breakfast like 2 weeks ago, unless it's the same thing every morning, right? So low storage, high retrieval. It's there, but it's not going to stick. You have some things that are high storage but low retrieval. I always think about this when I'm doing like, do you ever do like applications for credit and they'll bring up an old address you had like 30 years ago? And you see the address like, oh, that makes sense. I remember that. But if somebody told you, where did you live 30 years ago in a town, if it's not the same address you have, oftentimes we can't recall that. But we see it, well, we know it when we see it, right? Then there's things like this that are high storage, high retrieval, like our current address, because we're using that all the time. We're always reminded what our address is every time we pull up to the house. So what we need to do is help students really have high storage and high retrieval. And here's the big idea that comes out of cognitive science is that the more connections we make with new learning, the better we can retrieve it. The more settings we learn something, the more different ways. So for example, if all we learn is the definition of a word, evaporation, for example, that it's the process of liquid turning to vapor, what's going to happen over time is that connection is going to fade, that neuron is going to fade. or the memories may be stored, but we really can't retrieve it. But what if we can do this though? Instead of just learning the definition, we have to explain it to somebody else, or we see an image of it. So now we can picture evaporation and I can describe the image I've got in my mind, or I see a real life example. So I'm constantly reminded every time it, rains and it's hot, and then, the sun comes out and the water begins to evaporate. Oh, that's evaporation. I'm reminded of that. Or if I get to apply it like in a science experiment. So what all this says is it brings us to our sixth phase of learning, which is that we need opportunities to extend and apply our learning. So instead of doing this, which is the usual thing, right, where we just teach, practice, test, and then kids forget, that's how we get to them forgetting 90% of what they learn in the classroom in 30 days. What if we do projects or research or writing and presenting? It's really deeper learning because now kids have come back to that new knowledge multiple times, multiple ways. It sticks with them, right? And this leads us to the sixth phase of learning. We saw lots of examples of powerful strategies connected to extend and apply. And so these are the strategies we saw, for example, cognitive writing, guided investigation, structured problem solving. So now you see the power of these things. And I would say that we find that oftentimes these are the very strategies that are most absent in classrooms. Teachers feel like I don't have time for this, right? I don't have time to do any of this. Well, then, but what are we really doing if we're teaching things their kids are just forgetting? Are we really accomplishing our goals here? Plus, by the way, these are the things where students get voice, they get choice, they get to bring their own interest to what they're learning. This is where learning becomes joyful too. And so we've lopped both long-term memory, but also joy out of our classrooms when we don't do these things. So as you're coaching teachers, you may find that they're saying, I want to find some ways to bring joy or have kids remember what they're doing. It's like maybe some of these strategies are where they could find or set a goal for themselves. So, for example, like, we might write about what genetic adaptations make sharks nature's perfect predator, or talk about hurricane forces in the Atlantic Ocean. Or maybe we solve a problem that's real life to us, like how much will it cost to build a set for the school play, that kind of stuff. Real life examples, authentic problems, right? So again, you think about your own personal learning journey. My guess is you had to spend a lot of time practicing, reflecting, whether it's learning a new language, or some new skill, cutting with a miter saw, whatever it might be. But then were there opportunities to extend and apply your learning? So my example, Jim, I think would be, yeah, I had to practice these riffs a lot until they got automated, right? So I could almost set it and forget it. I think for me, extension and application, or extending and applying, was when I heard a different version of the song. There's other bands that play that same song. The Black Keys have a version. But I think for me, it was actually hearing Taj Mahal play it with the Rolling Stones. Whereas like it was slower, it's grittier, it's pretty cool. You could kind of tell, you could hear Keith Richards coming in. And it kind of got me thinking, what would my own take on this song be? And that was my extend and apply. So for yourself, what would this fifth and sixth phase of learning look
I
like?
suppose it would be the cognitive writing. I do a thing every day where I sort of reflect on the day previously. So I start my day with kind of reflection, and so part of it is what was life giving yesterday, and part of that's gratitude, just to be aware of what happened that was a life giving experience. And then the second thing I do is I talk about, well, what was life taking, or I know that sometimes if I'm feeling really morose, life sucking. It's really crappy. And so, as I've been learning these ideas from the interviews I've been doing, the surveys I've been getting, books I've been reading, it's really been my main focus. Unfortunately, it's distracted me from our book. But anyway, it's been about, well, how do I apply? I mean, are there people I resent that I need to be more grateful to?
Yeah.
And am I really focusing on the most important things? Like that's a big thing that's come up as time goes quickly. And you don't just do all the good stuff. You have to focus on doing the great stuff, the most important things, because pretty quickly time's going to be gone.
Yeah.
And so all the things I've been learning from these wise people, and the most important thing I've learned is people are awesome. I've looked at 100 surveys, interviewed, I don't know, 30 people, 4 continents. In every case, they've blown me away with their wisdom and their goodness, their basic decency as human beings. So anyway, I'd say my extending and apply is, well, how do I internalize these things, make them a part of my life? And it's happening in my morning reflections on what's been life-giving and what's been life-taking. And hopefully there's more life-giving the more I apply the ideas I'm learning.
That's really cool. Yeah. So both trying to present it, but then also like applying it. bring it
Right.
back to yourself. That's
Right.
great.
Yeah,
So
I guess an application, an
yeah,
obvious application would be that I'm trying to, I'm putting the presentation together. So that's happening too.
nice. So I'm taking you now like through the six phases of learning. That gives you a sense of the science of learning, science of teaching. I kind of water skied over stuff we could scuba dive into, right? But wanted to give you enough of a sense of how it all ties together. So now the person you probably really want to hear from is Jim. So I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's been such a pleasure. So fun to hear this, and it's the evidence, I think, of the science of learning that I always learn more every time I hear you talk. So it's really, really quite great. And I just want to touch on a few big ideas, simple ideas, as we work this through. And I would say there's four dimensions for coaching, and I want to talk about those four dimensions. So the first one is way of being. Second one is your coaching skills. Third one is expertise. Fourth one is the coaching cycle. I would argue if you don't use coaching, I'm not confident you're going to be able to take all of the ideas that Brian shared and have them translate into practice. And so coaching is a vital, the two things are not separate. What we know about science of learning, what we know about the science of teaching, and having effective coaching. Too often, what happens is there's what I call nominal change. People talk about stuff, but they don't actually do it. So they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're doing the new classroom instruction that works," but actually, when you go in the classroom, you don't really see stuff, and people don't understand the phases of learning. And so, coaching takes you deeper. So I want to talk about these things. This is what we've learned. Next year will be 30 years of studying coaching. And so if what you're doing conflicts with what I'm saying, if what you're doing works, keep doing it. I'm not suggesting this is the only way. There are many ways to get there. But this is what we've learned, mostly by making a lot of mistakes. And the first thing was that you need a set of beliefs that guide your practice. You need to know what are the principles that guide my actions? Because you could have someone whose principles interfere with their ability to be effective. And we talk about the partnership approach as our way of doing it. And we look pretty broadly at the research on change, and we landed on a set of principles. But I want to summarize them in this little chart right here. I would say that there are probably three ways of being that you could take when you work as a change leader. Coaching is often considered facilitative. That's a partnership approach. And what happens with facilitative coaching is the coach doesn't share their expertise. So if Brian was coaching me on how to put together my presentation, he probably wouldn't have to tell me how to get organized. He wouldn't have to give me his ideas, but he could listen to me, he could ask questions, he could help me make a plan. Or if he's telling me how to helping me figure out how to clean out my garage, I don't need him to tell me what to do. I can figure it out myself. And lots of coaching, such as that certified by the International Coaching Federation or the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. It's really this kind of coaching. When people talk about life coaching, they're probably talking about a facilitative coaching. Cognitive coaching would fit here. Cognitive coaching is an example of facilitative coaching. And it's great when the person has the expertise they need to do this stuff. I set aside my expertise so our conversation can focus on helping the other person set goals, make plans, and so forth. The second thing is the dialogical approach to coaching. So the facilitative is great when the person knows what they need to know, but sometimes they don't know what they need to do. Maybe it's a new teacher struggling with classroom management, or they don't know the curriculum, or any number of different things. The coach should have expertise. They just don't act like an expert. They act like a partner. So the dialogical approach is where I share ideas without telling the person what they should do. I might say something like, "Do you mind if I share a few things I've seen other teachers doing when they've addressed this issue you're talking about?" But I don't say, "You should do this. I figured out what you should do." As Michael Bungay Stanier says in his book, The Advice Trap, we think our advice is way more helpful than it is. We think other people want it way more than they do. The reality is, what's going to happen is a person's going to make a choice. You might like to say, "I'm just going to tell the teacher what to do and they should do it." But people from 6 years old to 86-year-old are really good at nodding their head yes and doing nothing. People do have choice whether you acknowledge it or not. So you're likely going to have more opportunities to make choice happen or to get change happening when you take the dialogical approach where you say, "Let me share some possible things." And then the third approach is telling the person what to do. And for those of you who are listening who are leaders, there are times when people have to do certain things. If your son has a messy bedroom. There's a science project going on underneath the bed. Who knows what's happening? Things are growing on all those plates he shoved under there. And you say, hey, you got to go clean your bedroom. It's a health hazard. You're not going to be okay with your son saying, I don't think I really want to do that. That's not a choice. I wasn't saying what's your choice. I'm saying it has to be done. And there'll be times, unfortunately, in a system where people have to do things. And that's the directive approach. But that's not really the coaching approach. The coaching approach is probably going to be facilitative or dialogical because there's a lot of evidence to say when you look at, for example, Richard Boyatz's book on the science of change, or Richard Ryan and DC's work on motivation, that unless the person cares, it's likely not going to happen. The first thing then is the way of being, the beliefs that guide your practice. And there's a set of principles that guide this, the partnership principles. You can find them pretty quickly if you Google the principles. But the main idea is starting in a facilitative way. And then when I need to share ideas, sharing ideas in a dialogical way to increase the likelihood the person will implement. We'll be more effective as change leaders when we take that approach. The second thing is about the way you communicate, the communication skills you do. And that has to do with the way you ask questions and the way you listen. Asking questions, it's really about asking a real question. It's really about asking something from a place of curiosity, not control. So when I'm asking a good question, I don't know what the person's answer is, and I'm not leading them to a destination. I mean, a really good question communicates respect for the other person. I think you have valuable things to say, and I want to hear your ideas. As one coaching expert from the United Kingdom said, a good question doesn't make the other person wrong. And a good question isn't one that's trying to get the person to go somewhere. If I said something like, don't you think more open questions would increase student engagement? It's not really a question. It's advice with a question mark. It's like saying, don't you think I deserve a raise? Not really a question. Real questions, the other person doesn't have to disagree with you to answer. If I said, don't you think the kids would learn more if there were success criteria on the board and the teacher doesn't think that's an issue? They would say, it would have to say, no, I don't agree with that. If they have to say, no, I don't agree with that, I haven't asked a good question. And good questions take the person deeper. Sometimes these are called probing questions, but I don't like the idea of probing. That's some guy in a white suit sticking me with something cold. I like the idea of an invitational question. It invites the person to go deeper. So if you said, well, if you did that change in teaching you're talking about, what would be the difference for the kids? That's a deeper question. Often the teacher will pause and go, yeah, well, what would be the deeper question? Do I want that to be the goal? And then listening is a key part of what coaches do. Of course, I would say that questioning and listening are to coaching what skating is to ice hockey. You want to play the game? You really need to be able to do these two things. So listening has internal and external elements to it. This picks up on what you were saying, Brian. But as listeners, Kate Murphy in her book "You're Just Not Listening" says that the study of how we process information says that we can. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, Brian, but I'm quoting Kate Murphy. But that people will say about 100 words per minute, but our brains could process about 600 words per minute. And so what happens is we start to think about other things, or we get distracted, or we make assumptions. And if you really want to listen, you have to stay with them where they are. And one way to do that is to develop a habit of paraphrasing what the person says, and then asking a question that for me is my favorite coaching question for listening, just to say, do I have that right? And when you say, do I have that right? If you're right, you click into alignment. But you can't ask that question unless you're listening. So internally, there's things going on. Externally, you're making eye contact, not too much, that's kind of creepy, but you're making eye contact, you're turned towards the person, you're not looking at your watch, you're not interrupting, you're not completing their sentences. You ask the question, you let them answer. Listening is a powerful way of communicating respect, but it's necessary. If I'm thinking with you, I got to know what you're saying. And both of these things aren't just coaching skills, they're life skills. The way you ask questions will lead to deeper conversations, and deeper conversations will lead to a better life. The way you listen, one of the best ways you can communicate respect, and also to deal with difficult conversations. The third thing is expertise, and Brian's talked a lot about this. We would say we're always striving for expertise that's easy and powerful. Now, it's not going to be easy. We have a classroom full of students. They're all moving in their own places. They won't have their own clocks going on. We want to do everything in our power to make it easy for them to do it, because there's a book called Influencer by Patterson and Grenny. And they say when people find something that they think is worth it and they can do it, they'll do it. People don't actually resist change. They just resist change because they don't think it's worth it or they don't think they can do it. So if your governor came on the news tonight and said, you know, we've historically horribly underpaid educators all across the state of Alabama. Tomorrow, every educator in Alabama is going to get a $50,000 raise. It'll be in your bank account tomorrow when you wake up. There wouldn't be a lot of resistance to change. There wouldn't be people saying, oh, I hate that when I get more money. People would embrace it because I want it and I don't have to do anything. It's easy and it's powerful. And so we're striving to take complex stuff and make it accessible. So the trouble is, there's all these books on teaching practices. You have to figure out what's the different teaching practices I'm going to use. And it could be complicated. And so we talk about creating an instructional playbook, a simple document where we have one pagers created. And Brian and I have been working on the instructional playbook for the 14 teaching strategies that he talks about in the new classroom instruction that works. This is one for cognitive interest cues. And then we have checklists about how to implement it. And so the coach has expertise around instruction. They can share that, but the coach also understands data. They also understand how to set goals and hit goals. So I wanted to put this in the chat, and I can't see the chat on my screen, Brian, but I wanted people to share what they've learned about coaching. I'm curious, how would you answer this question, Brian? What's something you've learned about coaching over the last 10 years? We sort of talked about how it reflects the science of learning, but I'm curious what you're thinking.
Yeah, honestly, I was struck by the active listening piece because I think that's the most difficult, but the most powerful. And my thought this morning was, that is like effortful. That's slow thinking, right? To really, it's interesting because the it takes a lot of time and energy, I think, to really actively listen. But I think that idea of listening your way into change or helping someone change is really powerful too. I think that's probably my key takeaway is that listening is the at least for me the better half of coaching.
You know what I think too is it's a skill. It's not you're just born a good listener. I think it's a skill that you can learn just like you learn how to skate.
Yeah,
And I think it's easier for some people than other people, to, maybe depending on the environment they grew up in and all those things. But anybody can learn to be a good listener. And part of it is just training your brain to turn off the impulse to jump in and to take control of the conversation or to solve people's problems, just to ask the question, let them answer.
yeah,
Often, when you get good at this, and I've seen this just in the many role plays we've done, people will get the answer to their question if they just let the other person talk. Instead of asking the question and distracting them, they let it go.
right, right.
Well, the fourth dimension, and if you're seeing, maybe pick, if you could highlight a couple things you see in the chat, that would be great. I see there's like 60 comments there. So,
Yeah. A lot of folks reflecting on listening, Jim. Trust, relationships, partnering. I think seeing yourself as a co-equal in those conversations. That's I'm asking deeper questions. A lot of good reflections here all across the group.
that co-equal idea, I think it's recognizing teachers as professionals and not unskilled laborers. It's not my job to tell the teacher, it's not like stacking shelves at Walmart. It's not like some kind of unskilled this is how I want you to put the bales on the wagon. Um, it's a complex professional thing. And if we want this teachers we want for our schools, we have to have professionals teaching, not people who are going to come to us for the solution to every problem.
Mhm.
So that's the essence of the first three things. And the fourth one is a coaching cycle. So the way of being is a set of beliefs that position and recognize the teacher as a professional. The coaching skills are really how you listen and ask questions, because it's a thinking partnership, and I want to ask questions that help you think deeper and then help me stay with you so I can be involved in the conversation. But just because I'm a coach, it doesn't mean I don't have expertise. I understand what effective instruction and effective learning, or what the science of learning is and effective instruction, and I can explain it clearly, and I can gather data to see reality and then set goals. And all of that happens in a coaching cycle, what we call the impact cycle. Now, one of my big ideas is that you need autonomy and you need effective teaching practices. And one way that happens is the coaching cycle we're going to talk about. Because I would argue if you want a rigorous model for coaching, that's what I'm going to describe right here. But, and this may challenge some people's thinking, but I feel like we've gotten it backwards when it comes to professional development and professional learning in schools. We tend to think of it like this. So you have someone like Brian Goodwin, looks at all the research on science of learning, all the research on the science of instruction. So you become a consultant in that work. You show up at his school to teach the teachers how to do it. Research says this is important, you should do it. And then the idea is teachers will use it and things will be better for kids. The only trouble is often teachers don't like just being passive resistance of the content. Even if they do like the ideas, they may not implement them. They'll try them a few times and sustain. And what we found at any rate is they don't keep using the content. It disappears. That's how we started coaching back in the early 2000s. I worked at the Center for Research on Learning with Don Deschler and a bunch of other researchers. They created a whole body of research on what's called content enhancement and strategic instruction. And we would show up at the school and try to get teachers to do what it was. Teachers liked the ideas, they just didn't sustain them. And so what we've learned is to flip it. What we would say is you start with the students and you learn to set goals. The coach and teacher in partnership set goals for students. Now, for a goal to matter to the teacher, they have to care about it. It has to be an emotionally compelling goal to the teacher or it's not going to happen. And so it's all about helping the teacher see what's happening in reality and then setting a goal and then identifying a strategy. So the research is just as important. But the first thing is, what's the change I want to see in my students' engagement or my students' achievement? Then once I've set that goal, then I identify a strategy. And the power of starting with the student is the teacher's involved in the process the whole way. And you've identified an objective standard for excellence that counts. Is there a difference in kids? If there's no change in what's happening for students, in my opinion, it hasn't worked. There has to be a change in kids, a positive improvement to say this practice has worked. And so this builds in a way to measure whether or not the strategies are being done. And instead of me sitting at the back of the room with a checklist of what you're supposed to do it right, the standard of excellence, the thing that forces me to be good is, did we hit the goal or not? Once we set the student focused goal, I'm going to have to implement the strategy effectively and sort of, I might not do it exactly the way it is in the book, but I'll do it in the way that works for me and works for my students. And then we have a built-in way to go back to the district and say, or whoever wants to gather data and say, here are the goals we set and here are the goals we hit. You have a built-in clear evidence of what worked. And I would say, if you're going to try to convince people to, a bird just hit my window. Did you hear that? Like a rocket went off. Sorry for the bird. At any rate, I would say, if you want to demonstrate that coaching's working, there needs to be a direct line between what the coach does and the outcome with students. And that's why having a student-focused goal becomes so important. Now, I want to walk it through with an example. This is a teacher named Kat, ninth grade social studies teacher. And I video recorded her class. She watched the video. I watched the video. We got together to talk about what was happening in the classroom. And we use this process called the impact cycle. I'm going to just talk through this briefly, and then we'll kind of come to a conclusion. But the first thing that we did is we got a clear picture of reality. And so I video recorded her class. She watched the video. And although I hadn't worked with her before I talked with Brian, the way we would do it now is we would look at the 6 phases of learning. And we would say, where is this group of students and where do they need to be working? Should be working more on practice and reflection or extend and apply, or are they not interested or commit to learning? And in the case of Kat, the goal we set was about committing to learning. The kids were, as she said, using a basic vocabulary about engagement. She said the kids are strategically compliant, but they're not authentically engaged. And she said, I want them to be authentically engaged. So the goal we set was what we call a peers goal. We found in our coaching, mostly in Othello, Washington and Beaverton, Oregon, that SMART goals didn't really work for us. Now, SMART goals aren't a bad thing, but we found people were just trying to spell smart all the time. And they weren't really asking the important things like, is this really going to make a difference in kids' lives? Is it going to have a socially significant difference in their lives? And have we done everything we can do to make this as easy as possible for it to work? And do I really care about this goal? And then can I identify a pathway to the goal? And is there a measurable outcome? And is it a student focused goal? So I'd say if your district's all happy about SMART goals, I wouldn't get rid of them. But I think you need to be asking the teacher as you're coaching them, have you identified a goal that's really, really important? And does it really matter to you? And is there a better way we can do this? There'll be less friction so we can really make this work for kids. And what's it going to look like if we get there? What's our measure? What's our finish line for this coaching? And then what's the pathway to the goal? And usually the teacher will want you to do something that's a strategy. She'll say, "Oh, I really want to change my questioning, or I need to do more small group activities," or they'll come with a. And my question always is, "Well, if you do that thing, what will be the difference for students?" And then I say, "Well, why don't we make that the goal, the changing kids, and then because maybe the strategy won't work, so long as we have that as the goal, that's going to be really helpful." Then during the learning phase, what I do is I explain the strategy. I probably have a checklist, a precise explanation of what it looks like, maybe drawn from the playbook. I might say to the teacher, let's go through this checklist and see if you want to modify it at all to try to implement it. So it's not just me dumping it on them. We're working it out together. Sometimes we co-construct a checklist, but if I already have a checklist, it seems silly for me not to share it. We go through it so we're really clear on the practice. And I say to the teacher, look, you need to tell me if you want to modify this. I don't want them to pretend they're going to do it and not do it. So let's go through it. If you think it's too much work to do this, we can find another way. We have a goal. So let's do it. If the teacher says this, I do it, we do it, you do it thing. She said, I kind of like that, but I just want to do the you do it part. Is that okay? I would say, well, that wouldn't do it that way. And here are the reasons, but it's your class, it's your students. We have a goal. Let's see if you can hit the goal. So the goal keeps you honest because probably the teacher's going to go, I don't really think it will work if we do it that way. So you involve them as partners in the thinking. And then you give them a chance to see it. It might be you watch a video, you might watch another teacher, you might go in the classroom and model it, but they hear about it, they see it, and then they implement the practice. And wouldn't it be wonderful if what happens is it just works like a charm? But usually what happens is it doesn't work. Usually what happens is um, you have to make adaptations. And there's certain adaptations you would take. You would change the goal, change how you measure progress towards the goal, change the strategy, change how you teach the strategy, or just wait. You might say, I'm going to get there one way or another. So with Kat, what I did is I had her watch a video of her class. Um, she watched the video, and then I sat down to ask her a series of questions. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how close was that to your ideal class? And questions like that. And she said, well, I would give it about a 5. And I said, why? Why would you say that? And she said, well, I don't like my questions. And the kids weren't engaged. And so I asked her, well, if the kids were engaged, what would it look like? Do you want to make that your goal? And so she established that she wanted the kids to be authentically engaged. And to get authentic engagement, she would use exit tickets to gather information. We tried out the exit tickets. They didn't really work. We had to move to a different kind of thing, with what we call experience sampling. Then I sat down with her and I went through different kinds of questions. I had a little checklist of how to ask questions in class. She and I modified a little bit. I went in her classroom and I modeled the practices. And I once showed a video of me modeling in one of our workshops, and this teacher, Aretha, came up to me and she said, "Hey, I'm so glad you showed that video of you modeling that practice in the classroom." I said, "Oh, thanks. Great. I'm so pleased to hear that. Why?" She says, "Because you weren't, I thought I had to be really good, but you weren't that great. I could do what you did." So that's what I did when I was doing that. And then we had to make modifications because initially changing the questions didn't work. We had to do other things. So we ended up using cognitive interest cues, what we call thinking prompts. So she would use questions to prompt questions, and she ended up making little scenarios, little cases to discuss. She was talking about the way a bill is passed through Congress, and so she started with challenges where they need rules in the school. So there were different scenarios where kids would have these lively discussions, and then it really took off. So I'm going to shut down the screen and open up this question. What questions do you have about instructional coaching or the impact cycle? And I'll stop there. And Brian, what are your thoughts? What questions would you like to put out there?
Yeah, so I was struck by a number of things. And I think I'm going back to the quadrants, right, of finding things that are easy and powerful. I think that's where it's going to depend, obviously, for every teacher, right? So one of the things we would not say, don't go and try all 14 strategies, right? And I think it may depend on your teacher to find here's a strategy that looks like I'm ready for it now. Like, so for some teachers, for example, doing a guided investigation may be a bridge too far, but they might say, but I could do that thing. I'm going to work on my questions, right? And then my other thought was that by going back to like the science of learning, then you can get back to, okay, it's just not, or maybe they say, I want to do wait time. Great. Why? And then you can kind of get them back to, oh, because I actually want more students thinking about their learning. Okay, well, good. Then we want to make sure we ask questions that make them think about their learning. So um, it's the same thing, Jim. I was writing down lots of notes. I always learn more from you. Again, I've heard you describe the impact cycle before, but I think it's a really powerful way. And if maybe you also see how it does kind of reflect exactly what we're saying about learning. It's starting with their own curiosity, their own goal setting. And I saw several of you in the chat were saying goal setting is really the key thing here. And then you do some learning, you try it, you apply it, and then you keep tweaking. So it really reflects all 6 phases of those. And then you said you had a teacher that said, well, now I want to add this. Well, that's extending and applying. There's something else I'm going to add to the practice too.
There's a couple questions here.
Yep.
The one thing I
So
would say is the goal becomes really important because goals at standard, you know. So if the teacher says, I want to do all 14 goals, I'd say, well, I probably wouldn't do it that way. I'm not, or all 14 strategies. I'd
right.
probably say, but what's going to be the best way to help us hit the goal? And if it's overwhelming and impossible, then we just say, well, let's maybe dial in and zone in on one. And or maybe two, what's the best way to hit the goal? So everything's driven by the change in students we want to see. And that change in students should be powerful, socially significant. They will be different next year because of this goal. You got a powerful goal, and
Yep.
everything gets filtered through that.
Yeah.
And Anna's got a question about goal setting. She
Yep.
says, does goal setting become before or after the discussion, reflection, video of the current reality? So there are many ways of getting a clear picture of reality, Anna, and it's not just video, although video is free, but a lot of people don't like to look at video. One of our research participants once, we were sitting in a group watching the video of her lesson, and she was modeling
I
teaching practice, and she said, after she watched the video, she said, "I'm never wearing those purple pants again." That was her comment. So, but we would say most people, and this isn't just educators, this is everybody, most people don't have a clear picture of reality. So somehow, and they're not going to be motivated to change unless there's a gap between where they are and where they want to get to. That's what motivational interviewing would say, Miller and Rolnick's approach. So you need to get a clear picture of reality, make sure you focus on the most important things. So we start with that video or interviewing the kids or what we call a close watch. There's a whole host of things. And then we set the goal. And I might even start the lesson with the teacher by saying, after they've got the clearer picture of reality, I might even say something like, well, what would it look like if it was going exactly the way you'd like it to go? Just describe how you'd like the classroom to be. Let's just forget about this class right now. Just paint a picture for your vision of what would be ideal. And then I might say, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how close are you to that? And then we start to set the goal.
Yeah.
And then,
Another question, Jim. Do you see the one from Kimberly?
yeah, I'm gonna do. Let's see, what am I going on to?
Jason was asking also which part of the
So
cycle.
I'm going to do the one on the playbook just to say,
Yeah, yeah.
Caitlin, there's a lot of information. If you just type in Jim Knight instructional playbook, you should be able to find stuff. But there's a whole book on creating an instructional playbooks that I created. But I think you can probably find something free. If you go to our website, instructionalcoaching.com, there's a resources section. And if you poke around in the resources section, you can find things. And then
And Jim, I would add to that. The folks at A Plus Alabama are going to be sharing with you all kind of a beginnings of what a playbook might look like too. So you'll have a starting
exactly.
point there too.
Good point. And then Kimberly, for me, the goal is the teacher's goal, not my goal. I'm not trying to get the teacher to hit the goal, but that doesn't mean I sit there like a rock. I will share with the teacher what I'm thinking, but I feel the classroom is such a complex thing that I start from the place that I don't know that I'm right. So I say, I'm wondering about this. What do you think? If I'm trying to get them to do my goal, the science of change would say they're probably not going to embrace it. It has to be their goal. Because if they do my goal, they're going to come back 6 weeks later and say, I did that thing you said, it didn't work. because they don't own it. They don't go deep in it. And then the last thing, Jason, your question, which part of the cycle tends to stall out most often? I would say it's after the teacher gets into the improvement phase. They have what's called uninformed optimism at the start. But once they start to actually apply the practices before the adaptations are made, they move into informed pessimism. And people will give up if they don't have a coach there to help them work through it. Anyway, I'll turn it back to you, Stony.
Jim, thank you so much. This is a lot of information. I see Kylie's sign there. We love Jim Knight, if everybody doesn't see that. Yeah, take a minute, everybody, and just put some comments in the chat box, just thanking Jim and Brian for their time. We are just scratching the surface here. And one of the things I'm excited about for this year is you're going to have an opportunity to really go deeper in an area that you need to focus on, that you've already set a goal for your school or for yourself. And so we're going to differentiate a lot more in that area. If you'll stay with us just a couple more minutes, Dakota and I have a few things that we want to share with you, and then we will sign off. But we want to share, and we're going to kind of do a drum roll here for our big theme that we do with A Plus College Ready for this year. And the theme is drum roll, build, and we will continue to build on this learning. We talk a lot about making things and forming things and coming together, but it's all about networking and building learning together. And so that's what we're going to do. Dakota has a few final logistics that we want to share, and then we want to stay on just a second for a quick picture. Brian and Jim, if you'll stay with us, and then we'll put in the box when Dakota finishes a feedback form for you.
Oh,
Dakota?
hi everyone. Just a couple things to note throughout the year. Y'all meet 3 times face to face in your regional cohort. You can see the dates on the right side of the screen for your upcoming meeting. You'll either receive reminders from me or our wonderful partners at the regional in-service centers at Athens State and the University of Alabama. Excuse me. Power School information will be shared at the first in-person session if it hasn't already. There's a ton of sections for PLN in Power School, so we like to do that. Get your T-cert number at the first meeting and then register you for the proper courses based on what you need. So that way you don't have to worry about which section and where and all that stuff. You do have to attend 3 out of the 4 meetings, so this virtual meeting and then the 3 face-to-face meetings after that to get your ACLD approved PLU. And then you can log up to 30 APLDS hours through PLN, and we're going to give you a log both in a physical form and a digital form at that first in-person meeting. And then there's no pre-work for the next meeting, but do bring your continuous improvement plan, strategic plan, or PD goals. Stoney, did you want to say anything more about what they should bring?
Just any goals that they've already set for themselves. They don't have to create anything new, but I really want us to tailor the learning this year to fit, as Jim said, a goal that they already have that's important to them.
Lastly, kicking it back to you, Stoney.
All right, so we did put a feedback form in the chat box. If you'll take just a minute, Jim and Brian, some great comments in the chat box. I hope you'll read that before you log off. And if you don't have your camera on, I invite you to turn it on just for a minute. Dakota, if you'll grab a couple of screenshots for some social media promotion and just, we probably had close to 400 people at some points today. I know some of you have several people in one room. And so it's great to have such an awesome group. We are excited about the learning. I know for some of you, we'll see you next week, and then some of us on later for that first face-to-face meeting. But I want to thank you, Jim and Brian. Thank you so much for partnering with us this year and being willing to share some early drafts of work. Either one of you have any comments before we sign off?
Just gratitude, Stony, for pulling this group together. It's fun to think that we've gone from Madison to Montgomery to Mobile. I know I was missing an M.
And one last minute reminder just before we log off, if you are in a room with multiple people, please email me or drop it in the chat box, the names of all of those people in the room, so that way we can make sure everybody gets credit.
Yeah. And Jim, anything?
Just thanks a lot. It's a pleasure. It's going to go in my life-giving part of my journal tomorrow that we did this. So I'm grateful for the chance.
Awesome. Thank you. Guys, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you face to face. Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
Wow.
Bye.